This is Parents Who Think, and I'm Danusia Malina-Derben. I'm in conversation with Aurélie Athan, a reproductive psychologist and leading scholar of matrescence, a term that describes the transition to motherhood as a developmental rite of passage, not just a lifestyle change. In this conversation, we go far beyond baby books or birth plans. Aurélie breaks open the assumptions we make about motherhood, who it's for, what it means, and why the capital M, mother, still holds such rigid power over how we're allowed to feel, parent, and identify. We talk about as a lifelong transformation, a shift that is physical, social, spiritual, and economic, and why our generation is at the center of one of the most significant reproductive reckonings in human history. And we explore something not often heard out loud, the idea that having a physical child doesn't automatically make you feel like a mother, and that reproductive identity is complex, deeply personal, and always self-defined. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you. I am pleased to be here.
Your work of Matrescence, tell us a bit more about what that means.
Sure. And I think becoming a mother was a given in society up until very recently. So we have so many pathways of becoming now that weren't available to us. So I think for the first time, the veils are lifting, as we see also, by the way, reproduction is being delayed. More and more people around the world are either delaying their parenthood or opting out altogether. Women, the delayed entry into childbearing is a very real trend for most part of the world. And of course, folks who were denied family building in the past, either because we didn't have the reproductive technologies. Let's think of our aunts and grandmothers who infertility would have not allowed them to have their family, or now we have surrogacy, LGBTQ families creating their families in creative ways. So now we have this diversity of a landscape where people can participate in this thing called family. So I think people are getting real with what is the real status of families, and women really sort of want to become mothers. So, this is a good segue to talk about matrescence, to just nest it. If I painted a good picture now of this diverse landscape, that matrescence, the transition to motherhood, is just one of those reproductive identities. Another type of reproductive identity is being childless by choice. And then even within matrescence, let's think about it. There are so many paths to motherhood, right? One can do it smoothly or through a long and difficult journey. One can have one child or many, spread out or compressed. One may have lost their children along the way. One may have adopted. One may have used their own genetic material or not. And so even through matrescence, there's this just beautiful individuality. And I think that's really at the core of matrescence when we talk about finding her person. What we can start talking about now is not just mother with a capital M having an experience, but, Aurelie having an experience, or Martha, a person who walks their reproductive path from the time that they come into it, from adolescence, and see what happens. And so, that's what I had discovered, is that with talking to women directly, through interviewing them, through working with them, that they have each such a unique story of how it happened to them. But there were a few universals.
Can you speak to those?
So I think that the universals are this idea that perhaps, like other stages of life, like adolescence or death and dying and birth, that there are these hinges of life in which most cultures sort of try to shape the citizen who passed through it. I think that they sort of thought about it as more of a bodily experience, but I, as a psychologist, been thinking about it much more as a biopsychosocial, spiritual, economic experience, meaning that if we say matrescence like adolescence, then it's a super holistic change, right? It's a 360 experience. It means our physiology will have some shifts. The next would be your social standing, meaning how is your status? Are you looked upon differently? Your relationships, micro and macro, meaning your spousal relationships if you're in a partnership, meaning your peer relationships are all going to shift. Then you have your economic changes. Many women talk about sort of hitting a maternal wall in their work, and or changing their power status in the home. We have I call the spiritual dimension too, or existential, this bigger question, not only of who am I, but what is the meaning and purpose in life?
Yes.
We have awakenings of justice, like reproductive justice, the haves and have-nots, not only in health disparities, but maybe in the world. So this is a true shift. And when we talk about flux, I want to first call it a shift by saying there's this philosophical Greek term called metanoia, which is this idea of a whole mindset change. It's a real conversion experience, I would akin it to. Just like a child becoming an adolescent, the mind does not go back to its naive state, but it is also not a linear shift. It doesn't just happen straightforwardly, and it doesn't happen overnight. And if anything, there's a lot of maybe flux and flummox and a lot of suffering, a lot of conflict, a lot of ambivalence, a lot of coexistence, maybe not warring all the time. So that's what I mean by the universals. So in short, and in summary, every person who goes through the transition to parenthood, I think, will experience at some level a bio, psycho, social, existential, economic, spiritual change. And the time that it takes to sort of feel settled, may also be a lifetime, may get reawakened with each child. And of course, cultural specificity and competence would also let us think about, the traditions that might either help or hinder this. And I always try to remember not to sort of romanticize any tradition in terms of how it seems to be helping a mother. We have to be really critical thinkers and have our mothers themselves think about what are their real needs, not what their family or society is telling them they should or shouldn't have available to them.
Well, that's like an incredible double bluff, isn't it? That whole idea of critically thinking about what you actually need rather than what you've been kind of sold, that you need. So, and did I get supported? What kind of support was there for me? How much do you see that this support issue really has impact in the experiences, either the experiences that we have or the way that we look at them?
So I think, just like we want to think about when we view a child, who is holding the child, we really need to think about who's holding the mother. And my class is actually called, mother-child matrix. What is the matrix around her? And I think it's really a critical problem in a rapidly sort of westernizing world, meaning modern world, where it's probably going to look something like the dispersion of kin. It's just very, very hard without allo mothers and without affordable family support around you to do this. What I think your audience should really know is that we are in one of the most phenomenal social shifts of humanity because of these reproductive shifts. So you have, on the one hand, never before in the history of mankind are women having less than 3 children. So the reproductive drops, never seen before. The second thing that we've never seen before is this sort of social fabric. And then on top of it, we have, these kind of larger social structures that have really, fallen apart. We may not have the answers, but I want to let your audience know that this generation is not only facing new things for its own generation and before, but it's almost doing it for humanity at large. It is truly a massive historic shift.
Mm-hmm. Take us on to reproductive identity, which is really what you've obviously been talking about, the dispelling of the myth that there's one pathway, yeah?
Yeah, you got it.
Why would we ever imagine that there was ever one pathway? I realize why we did, but when did this start kind of unraveling, the one pathway piece? For you personally, at what point in your own life? I'm curious, actually.
I think it first began actually, and I've always been interested in women's lifespan development, happened to be around reproductive cancers where it first started, and seeing and listening and reading about women's survival stories and how they were all sort of coming to these universal questions, but doing it very differently depending on who they were. So I think I heard the deeper register, I guess, of women's voices, when you just hear their their wails to existence. Who am I? Why am I here? What was the whole point of this thing? So that made me sort of get very open-ended and think about reproductive identity as this really big table we can all sit at, and of course play musical chairs and as well, because how we come into our reproductive pathway may not be how we end up. Let's take the story of someone who's going to a child's birthday party but has experienced many miscarriages but has not disclosed their status, and they may or may not be invited or might be uncomfortable because they don't have kids. And the way that we sort of look at each other over these invisible fences, but we have no real idea internally how people self-identify. Someone with a child may actually feel more internally not yet like a parent and feel more like their, independent selves. And someone without a child, and I remember actually in one of the conferences that you and I talked about, someone had come to me and she had just spoken about her infertility journey and she was a performance artist and had laid out all of the medications and had done everything all up until deciding to adopt. And it was a conference on motherhood, and she asked me, do I belong here? And I thought that was extremely poignant. And I said, of course, does having a physical child make you internally feel like internally a mother? So that's our subjectivity. And that is our inalienable right to self-identify however we see fit. Our experiences are complex. We may have long, devastating, or uplifting stories of our reproductive expression. And in the end, no one should tell us who we are in that space. But when you marry identity with reproduction, then you get to tell this story of who am I? And that's, I think, the most powerful story of all.
I'm almost speechless at the profound gift in this conversation that you've rendered here, because what you've done is, I certainly feel it as I listen to you, is this cracking open of this idea about the pathway, the self-identity, how you feel inside, who you see yourself as. That physical child doesn't denote and doesn't fix any kind of identity. It doesn't have to be that way. And we're not taught that. This conversation that we're having isn't a normal conversation, basically. A typical conversation in media that I'm exposed to would be, well, once you have a child, that's it. Once you've decided not to, you take on this role, this identity. It's not the way it is. And that's what's so important. And why I wanted us to have this conversation, the very point that you made, does having a physical child make you feel like a mother? Yeah.
Thank you.
For goodness sake, if only so many women could hear that, and actually people could hear that, maybe there'd be so much more forgiveness and less acceptance of self, more playful exploration of self, what that means. I am so grateful to you that we could have this conversation.
Well, thank you to you as well, because it takes conversations like these to disseminate them so people can hear them, that they can have these conversations. And my hope to your audience is have these types of conversations, and maybe we can do them earlier. What would it look like if we normalized about whether I want to have a family or not, or how do I feel about my own experiences being in a family so far, and who do I think I can be in this space, and who have I been told I can be? I mean, that's just good conversation. I think it can happen in developmentally appropriate ways throughout the lifespan. So thank you for this conversation and for bringing it to the ears of your large audience. Thank you.
Isn't it revolutionary to hear a woman say, having a physical child doesn't define whether I'm a mother? Aurélie Athan doesn't just speak the unspeakable. She gives us language to live more truthfully inside our reproductive lives. And for that, I'm so grateful. If this episode moved you, I hope you'll pass it on. These are the conversations that change how we see ourselves and each other. Also, this podcast is part of a much wider conversation over on Substack. If you want the essays, the behind the scenes, the unfiltered questions, and community, that's where to go. Just type Parents Who Think Substack into your search engine. It'll come straight up. Until next time, everyone, Keep thinking, keep questioning, and as always, be kind to yourself.